power is a fragile illusion, often masquerading as an expensive tailored suit or a heavy luxury watch. For people who have never truly earned it, power is a weapon used to bludgeon those they deem beneath them. But the universe has a wicked sense of humor, and karma rarely waits an entire lifetime to collect its debts. Sometimes it only waits a few hours. This is the story of a man who thought a stained apron dictated a person's worth, completely unaware that the woman he was publicly destroying over a spilled cup of coffee held the deed to his entire corporate existence. The morning rush at the Brass Bell diner had finally reduced to a slow, manageable simmer. The scent of stale grease, overly roasted coffee, and lemon-scented floor cleaner hung thick in the air, a perfume that Jade Hayes actually found comforting. Jade was 32, wore her dark hair pulled back in a messy, practical claw clip, and currently sported a faded blue apron adorned with a rather tragic ketchup stain near the right pocket. To the casual observer, Jade was just another lifer in the service industry, surviving on tips and tired smiles in downtown Seattle. She moved with the quiet efficiency of someone who had carried heavy trays for years, refilling mugs, wiping down sticky vinyl booths, and calling out orders to the kitchen with an easy familiarity. But Jade's presence at the Brass Bell was a closely guarded secret, a personal ritual. She didn't just work at the diner, she owned it. In fact, she owned the entire city block it sat on, along with a sprawling multinational portfolio that made her one of the quietest, most ruthless billionaires on the West Coast. She kept the diner operational and worked one anonymous shift a month to stay grounded. It was the place her mother had worked to put her through college. It was her touchstone. At exactly 9:45 a.m., the diner bell chimed, slicing through the low murmur of the remaining patrons. Richard Sterling pushed through the glass door, looking violently out of place. Richard was the executive vice president of acquisitions at Kensington Roth, a towering commercial real estate firm. He was a man who communicated his net worth before he even opened his mouth. Today, he was wrapped in a charcoal Brioni suit, his wrist weighed down by a limited edition Patek Philippe, his leather shoes clicking sharply against the diner's scuffed linoleum floor. His face was set in a tight grimace of utter disgust, as if merely breathing the air inside. The Brass Bell was an affront to his immune system. Richard was not here by choice. Outside the greasy window, his sleek, midnight blue Porsche Panamera was resting at an awkward angle against the curb, a jagged piece of metal protruding from its front right tire. He was stranded, waiting for a premium flatbed tow service that had promised to arrive in 45 minutes. He surveyed the room, his eyes lingering on a couple of construction workers eating pancakes before landing on the only clean, empty booth in the corner. He marched over, not bothering to wait to be seated, and slid into the vinyl, instantly pulling out his phone and barking orders at an assistant on the other end. Jade watched him from behind the counter. She recognized the type immediately. She dealt with men like Richard Sterling in boardrooms across the globe, men who mistook volume for authority and cruelty for strength. But right now, she wasn't Jade Hayes, CEO of Hayes Global. She was just Jade, the waitress. She picked up a steaming pot of decaf, grabbed a fresh ceramic mug, and walked over to his booth. "Good morning," Jade said, her voice polite and even. "Can I start you off with some coffee while you wait?" Richard didn't look up. He held up a single, manicured index finger, the universal gesture for silence. Peasant. He continued to speak into his phone. "I don't care if the zoning permits are delayed, David. Tell the city councilman that if he doesn't push it through, we pull our funding for his little community center project. Yes. Fix it." He ended the call, tossed the phone onto the table, and finally looked at Jade. His eyes swept over her faded uniform, the ketchup stain, the worn-out sneakers, calculating her societal value in a fraction of a second and finding it effectively zero. "I don't drink whatever battery acid you serve in this establishment," Richard sneered, his voice loud enough to turn a few heads. "I want an iced oat milk matcha latte, lightly sweetened, with exactly 3 cubes of ice." Jade kept her customer service smile firmly in place, though her eyes sharpened slightly. "I'm sorry, sir. We're a traditional diner. We have standard drip coffee, tea, and soda. I can get you an iced tea if you'd like." Richard sighed, a heavy, theatrical sound of martyrdom. He leaned back, crossing his arms. "Of course you don't. Why would a place that smells like a neglected deep fryer have anything civilized?" "Fine. Bring me sparkling water, and make sure the glass is actually clean. I can see the smudges on these windows from across the street." "1 sparkling water. Coming right up," Jade said smoothly. She didn't flinch. She had endured worse from better men. As she walked away, Richard muttered, just loud enough for her to hear, "Incompetent." Jade poured a bottle of San Pellegrino into a freshly polished glass. Simon, the diner's day manager, leaned over the counter. "Who's the charmer?" Simon whispered, wiping his hands on a towel. Simon was one of the few people who knew exactly who Jade was, though he played along perfectly. "Just a man having a bad morning," Jade replied softly. "I'll handle him." "You want me to kick him out? He looks like the type to tip with a fake $100 bill that has a Bible verse printed on the back." Jade chuckled softly. "No, Simon. Let him stay. It's always fascinating to see how people behave when they think there are no consequences." She carried the tray back to Richard's table. As she approached, Richard was fiercely typing on his laptop, completely absorbed in his screen. "Here is your sparkling water, sir," Jade said, reaching out to place the glass on the table. At that exact moment, Richard abruptly threw his arm out to emphasize a point he was making on a sudden incoming call, entirely ignoring Jade's presence. His heavy cufflink slammed into the side of the tray. The glass tipped. Jade tried to correct the balance, but gravity won. The glass shattered against the edge of the table, splashing cold, sparkling water across the laminate surface. A few drops, no more than a fine mist, splattered onto the sleeve of Richard's charcoal Brioni jacket. The diner went dead silent. Time seemed to suspend itself in the diner. The clattering of forks ceased. The low hum of conversations died in the throats of the patrons. Even the grill cook in the back paused, his spatula hovering over a sizzling burger patty. Richard Sterling looked at his sleeve. He stared at the 3 tiny beads of moisture resting on the expensive Italian wool. Slowly he looked up at Jade. The vein in his forehead was visibly throbbing. "I'm so sorry, sir," Jade said immediately, reaching into her apron for a dry cloth to dab the table. "Let me get that for you. It was an accident." "Don't touch me," Richard roared. He shot up from the booth so violently that the heavy table screeched across the floor. He towered over Jade, his face flushed a dangerous shade of crimson. "Do you have any idea what this suit costs? Do you? Of course you don't. You'd have to work in this grease trap for 5 years to afford the lapel." "Sir, water won't stain the wool, I can assure you," Jade started, her voice remaining miraculously calm, which only seemed to infuriate Richard further. "Shut your mouth!" Richard yelled, stepping closer. He was trying to use his physical size to intimidate her, a classic bully tactic. "You are a clumsy, pathetic, uneducated waitress. This is why you're wearing a stained rag and serving eggs to construction workers. Because you are incapable of performing even the simplest, most mindless task without screwing it up." Murmurs broke out across the diner. A burly man 2 booths down half stood, ready to intervene. But Jade caught his eye and gave a subtle, microscopic shake of her head. She wanted to see how far Richard would go. She needed to know the true measure of the man standing before her. "I apologize for the spill," Jade said, her tone devoid of subservience, replaced instead by a cold, analytical detachment. "But there is no need to speak to me that way. It was a mutual accident." "A mutual accident?" Richard let out a harsh, barking laugh. He looked around the diner, making sure everyone was watching his performance. "You bump into me, ruin my morning, damage a $6,000 suit, and you have the audacity to talk back. You people are all the same. 0 accountability, 0 ambition. You expect handouts while you wallow in mediocrity." Simon, the manager, hurried over, stepping between Jade and Richard. "Sir, please lower your voice. There's no need for this. I will comp your beverage, but you need to sit down or leave." Richard sneered at Simon. "Are you the manager of this pathetic establishment?" "I am," Simon said firmly. "Then fire her, right now," Richard demanded, pointing a rigid finger at Jade's face. "If you have any shred of business sense, you will fire this incompetent woman on the spot. If you don't, I will buy this miserable little building, bulldoze it, and turn it into a parking lot, just to watch you both beg for unemployment." Jade stood behind Simon, her face completely unreadable. Her eyes, however, were locked onto Richard's face, memorizing every contour of his arrogant sneer. Kensington Roth, she thought, recalling the logo she had briefly spotted on his laptop screen before the spill. He's a Kensington Roth executive. "Nobody's getting fired," Simon said, crossing his arms, "but you are leaving. Now." Richard stared at Simon, then at Jade, his lips curled in absolute disgust. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a leather money clip, and peeled off a crisp $100 bill. He didn't hand it to Simon. Instead, he crushed it into a ball and threw it directly at Jade. It hit her collarbone and dropped to the floor. "Keep the change, sweetheart," Richard spat, his voice dripping with venom. "Buy yourself a new apron. And a clue, you'll be pouring coffee for the rest of your miserable, invisible life. Remember that every time you look in the mirror, you are nothing." He snatched his laptop, turned on his heel, and stormed out of the diner, the bell chiming cheerfully in his wake. Outside, the flatbed tow truck had just arrived. Richard barked at the driver, got into the passenger seat of the truck, and rode away, leaving a thick, uncomfortable silence in the brass bell. Simon turned to Jade, his expression a mix of concern and suppressed rage. "Are you okay, Jade? I should have thrown him through the window." Jade slowly bent down and picked up the crumpled $100 bill. She smoothed it out on the counter. She wasn't trembling. There were no tears in her eyes. Instead, the warm, approachable aura of the diner waitress had entirely vanished, replaced by an icy, terrifying composure. "I'm perfectly fine, Simon," Jade said softly, untying the knot of her apron. "What an absolute monster," Simon muttered. "Guys like that, they think they own the world. They think they can crush whoever they want, because nobody can touch them." Jade slipped the apron off and laid it neatly on the counter. She pulled the claw clip from her hair, letting the dark waves fall elegantly over her shoulders. She looked at the clock on the wall. It was 10:30 a.m. "Simon," Jade said, her voice shifting. It was no longer the voice of a co-worker. It was the voice of a CEO. "Cancel my shift for the rest of the day." "Where are you going?" Simon asked. Jade looked out the window at the spot where Richard's Porsche had been. A dangerous, brilliant smile touched the corners of her mouth. "I have a 2 p.m. acquisition meeting at the Kensington Roth headquarters," Jade said, pulling her cell phone from her pocket and dialing her executive assistant. It seems I need to go evaluate some of my new employees. The corporate headquarters of Kensington Roth Real Estate occupied the top 10 floors of a shimmering glass obelisk in the financial district. It was a place constructed on the aesthetics of intimidation, imported Italian marble floors, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the skyline, and a suffocating silence that smelled of expensive cologne and ruthless ambition. At 1:45 p.m., Richard Sterling was standing in the executive washroom, carefully adjusting his silk tie in the mirror. He had changed into a spare suit kept in his office, a sleek navy Tom Ford. The morning's irritation at the diner had faded, replaced by the electric thrill of impending victory. Today was the most important day of Richard's professional life. Kensington Roth was officially being acquired by CH Investments, a massive, shadowy conglomerate known for its aggressive takeovers and limitless capital. The founder and CEO of CH Investments was notoriously private, operating through proxies and ironclad NDAs. The industry rumor was that CH was an old money titan, an eccentric, ruthless septuagenarian who fired executive boards for sport. With the current CEO of Kensington Roth stepping down amid the buyout, the new ownership was coming today to appoint a new leader. Richard had spent the last 2 years backstabbing, maneuvering, and manipulating the board to ensure he was the only logical choice for the position. Richard walked out of the washroom and down the hallway to the grand boardroom. His colleague, David Kensington, the nephew of the founder, was already there, pacing nervously near the massive mahogany table. "You look relaxed, Richard," David noted, wiping his sweaty palms on his trousers. "Are you not terrified? They say CH is going to gut the executive suite. They say he's a butcher." "Relax, David," Richard said, taking a seat near the head of the table, leaning back with a confident smirk. "I've run the numbers. I brought in 60% of our revenue last quarter. Whoever this old man is, he cares about one thing: profit. I am the profit. By 3 p.m., I will be the CEO of this company, and you'll be answering to me." "I just hope the transition is smooth," David muttered, checking his watch. 1:55 p.m. "They should be here." Richard chuckled, pouring himself a glass of sparkling water from the crystal pitcher on the table. The sight of the water briefly reminded him of the pathetic waitress from that morning. He scoffed out loud. "What's funny?" David asked. "Nothing," Richard said, taking a sip. "Just reflecting on the natural order of things. Some people are born to be masters of the universe, David. Others are born to serve us coffee and clean up our messes. It's a beautiful system, really, as long as everyone stays in their lane. I had to remind a local peasant of her place this morning. It was quite invigorating." At exactly 2 p.m., the heavy, double oak doors of the boardroom clicked unlocked. The room instantly went silent. Richard stood up, buttoning his jacket, pasting on his most charming, sycophantic smile, ready to greet the elderly billionaire who would crown him king. First, 3 people entered in dark, tailored suits, a legal team, carrying thick leather portfolios. They spread out along the sides of the room without saying a word. Then, the lead counsel, a sharp-looking man with silver hair, stepped forward. "Gentlemen, may I present the sole owner and CEO of CH Investments and the new majority shareholder of Kensington Roth." Richard stepped forward, his hand extended, his smile gleaming. A woman walked through the doors. She was dressed in a razor-sharp, custom-tailored ivory suit that radiated authority. Her dark hair was styled in a sleek blowout, and her posture was impeccable, commanding the air in the room the second she crossed the threshold. She held a sleek black tablet in one hand. Richard's extended hand froze in mid-air. His smile fractured. The blood drained from his face so rapidly he felt dizzy. His heart performed a violent, stuttering leap against his ribs. He blinked once, twice. He prayed to a god he didn't believe in that his eyes were playing tricks on him. He prayed that the stress of the acquisition was causing him to hallucinate. But as the woman locked her piercing dark eyes directly onto his, he knew it was real. It was her. The waitress. The woman he had humiliated. The woman he had thrown a crumpled $100 bill at. The woman he had called a clumsy, pathetic, uneducated peasant just 4 hours ago. She was not wearing a stained apron. She was wearing power. Jade Hayes walked to the head of the table, completely ignoring Richard's frozen, outstretched hand. She placed her tablet down with a soft click that echoed like a gunshot in the silent room. David, completely unaware of the dynamic, eagerly stepped forward. "Ms. Hayes, it is an absolute honor. I am David Kensington. We are so thrilled to welcome you." "Thank you, David," Jade said, her voice smooth, refined, and completely devoid of the deferential warmth she had used that morning. She didn't look at David. Her eyes remained fixed on Richard, who was now trembling slightly, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. "And you must be Richard Sterling," Jade said. Her voice was like liquid nitrogen. Richard choked on the word. His throat had gone completely dry. The bravado, the arrogance, the vicious cruelty that had defined him all morning had evaporated. He felt suddenly, violently small. Am I what, Richard?" Jade tilted her head slightly, a shark examining a wounded seal. "Am I clumsy? Am I pathetic? Or am I just the woman who is going to be pouring your coffee for the rest of my miserable life?" David looked between the two of them, completely bewildered. "Wait, you two know each other?" Jade finally smiled. It was not a kind smile. "Oh yes," Jade said softly, her eyes glinting with a dangerous, triumphant light. "Richard and I had a very enlightening meeting this morning. He taught me a great deal about accountability. And ambition." She leaned forward, resting her hands on the mahogany table, closing the distance between herself and the man who had tried to destroy her. "Please, Richard," Jade commanded, gesturing to the chair. "Sit down. We have a lot of changes to discuss." The boardroom, previously a sanctuary of corporate dominance for Richard Sterling, suddenly felt like a hermetically sealed vault with the oxygen rapidly depleting. The silence was absolute, save for the faint, rhythmic hum of the central air conditioning and the terrified, shallow breathing of the executive vice president of acquisitions. Richard slowly lowered himself into his plush leather chair. His knees felt like water. His mind raced, desperately trying to construct a narrative, a defense, an apology, anything to salvage the impending wreckage of his career. He looked at Jade Hayes, searching for a trace of the subservient waitress he had verbally battered just hours prior. There was none. She sat at the head of the mahogany table, radiating an icy, impenetrable authority. "Let us begin," Jade announced, her voice echoing crisply against the glass walls. She gestured to the silver-haired man standing to her right. "This is Harrison Cole, Chief Legal Counsel for CH Investments. He has spent the last 48 hours reviewing the internal communications and acquisition strategies of Kensington Roth's executive team." Harrison distributed thick, black folders to David Kensington and Richard. Richard stared at the folder placed in front of him. A white label on the cover simply read, "Projected Liabilities, R. Sterling." "Ms. Hayes," Richard started, his voice cracking slightly before he cleared his throat to force a deeper register. "Jade, I believe there has been a profound misunderstanding. The events of this morning, I was under immense pressure. My vehicle had just been damaged, and my reaction was entirely out of character. I sincerely apologize if I offended you." "If," Jade repeated, her eyebrow arching in a gesture of pure, distilled skepticism. "You threw a crumpled $100 bill at my chest, Richard, and informed me that my destiny was to wallow in mediocrity. There is no if regarding the offense. But rest assured, I do not make billion-dollar corporate restructuring decisions based on my personal feelings about spilled sparkling water." David Kensington flipped open his folder, his eyes widening as he scanned the first page. "Ms. Hayes, what are these documents?" "Those, David, are the transcripts and email logs of your star executive's recent negotiations," Jade stated, folding her hands neatly on the table. "Richard prides himself on bringing in 60% of your quarterly revenue. However, I am less interested in the volume of the revenue and far more concerned with the toxicity of its source." Jade tapped the screen of her tablet. A large monitor, mounted on the boardroom wall, flared to life, displaying a highlighted email thread. "Let's discuss the Oak Ridge development," Jade said, leaning forward. "This morning, while sitting in my diner, I had the distinct displeasure of overhearing your phone call to your assistant. You explicitly instructed him to threaten City Councilman Gregory Walsh. You stated that if Walsh did not rubber stamp your zoning permits for the commercial high-rise, Kensington Roth would pull all promised funding for the Oak Ridge Community Center." David turned to Richard, looking genuinely appalled. "Richard, tell me you didn't do that. The Oak Ridge Center is a philanthropic initiative my uncle started. It's tied to a separate trust. We can't weaponize charitable donations to force zoning laws." "It was leverage," Richard snapped, his panic briefly morphing into defensive anger. "That's how business is done in this city, David. You've been too insulated by your uncle's name to understand the trench warfare of real acquisitions. Councilman Walsh was stalling. I applied pressure. The ends justify the margins." "The ends justify the margins," Jade repeated softly, testing the phrase as if it left a foul taste in her mouth. "A fascinating philosophy. It relies on the assumption that you are the smartest person in the room and that your leverage is absolute." She gestured to Harrison Cole. The lawyer stepped forward, adjusting his glasses. "Mr. Sterling," Harrison began, his tone entirely conversational, but devastatingly precise. "Extorting a city official using a philanthropic trust violates not only Kensington Roth's internal code of ethics, but also borders on federal fraud. Furthermore, CH Investments conducted an independent audit of the commercial high-rise you are so aggressively pushing." Harrison pressed a button on a remote, changing the slide on the monitor. It showed a graph of a plummeting trajectory. "The anchor tenants you promised for that high-rise? 2 of them filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy this morning," Harrison continued. "The 3rd is currently under investigation by the SEC. Your 60% revenue projection is built on ghost contracts and toxic debt. If Kensington Roth had proceeded with your strategy, the company would have been facing a massive liquidity crisis within 6 months. Richard's face drained of the little color it had left. That's impossible. My analysts assured me those companies were solvent." "Your analysts are terrified of you, Richard," Jade intervened, her dark eyes locking onto his. "I read their internal reviews. You foster a culture of fear. You belittle your subordinates. You scream at your assistants. And you terminate anyone who brings you bad news. Consequently, they stopped bringing you the truth. They let you walk blindly into a catastrophic financial trap just to avoid your temper." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle over the room like a heavy winter blanket. "This brings us back to the Brass Bell Diner," Jade said softly. "You assumed I was incompetent because I was serving coffee. You assumed my status made me inherently worthless. You evaluate the world through a lens of absolute arrogance, Richard. And that arrogance has not only made you an abusive human being, it has made you an abysmal businessman. Richard gripped the edges of the table, his knuckles turning white. His world was disintegrating in real time, dismantled by a woman he hadn't even deemed worthy of a second glance that morning. "Fine," Richard spat out, a desperate, cornered animal resorting to its last remaining weapon. "You've made your point. You bought the company. You don't like my methods, and you want me out. I understand. I'll clear out my desk." He pushed his chair back and stood up, trying to muster a final shred of dignity. He tugged at the lapels of his Tom Ford suit, lifting his chin. "But you'll be paying for the privilege of firing me," Richard said, a bitter, triumphant smirk touching the corners of his mouth. "My contract has an ironclad termination clause. If I am let go during a change of ownership, my golden parachute guarantees me $8 million in severance, plus vested stock options. So, enjoy your moral high ground, Jade. I'll enjoy my early retirement." He turned toward the double oak doors, fully intending to walk out with his millions. "Sit down, Mr. Sterling," Jade commanded. The raw power in her voice cracked through the room like a whip. Richard froze, his hand hovering over the brass door handle. He slowly turned around. "I did not dismiss you," Jade said, her eyes narrowing. "And you are severely mistaken if you believe you are walking out of this building with a single cent of my money." The smirk on Richard's face faltered, replaced by a deep, unsettling apprehension. He slowly walked back to his chair but did not sit down. He leaned over the table, trying to use his physical size to project dominance one last time. "My contract is legally binding, Miss Hayes," Richard said, his voice tight. "You can't just wave a magic wand and void it because you had a bad experience with me at a diner." "Actually, Richard, she can," Harrison Cole interjected cheerfully. The lawyer opened his own leather portfolio and extracted a single sheet of paper, sliding it across the polished mahogany table toward Richard. "I suggest you read Section 4, Paragraph B of the CH Investments Acquisition Protocol." Richard picked up the paper, his eyes scanning the dense legal jargon. Any executive found to be in gross violation of the parent company's ethical guidelines, or who engages in behavior that causes severe reputational damage or liability to the parent company or its subsidiaries, forfeits all rights to severance compensation. Richard threw the paper back onto the table, scoffing loudly. "This is a bluff! I haven't caused reputational damage to Kensington Roth. Nothing I did this morning has anything to do with this company's public standing." "But it has everything to do with CH Investments," Jade corrected him smoothly. She reached into the pocket of her ivory suit jacket and pulled out a small, familiar object. She placed it deliberately in the center of the table. It was the crumpled $100 bill. "When I acquired Kensington Roth," Jade explained, her voice dropping to a dangerously quiet timbre, "I absorbed it into the Hayes Global Network. My portfolio is extensive, Richard. I own commercial real estate, shipping logistics, tech startups, and a few personal, sentimental properties." David Kensington looked at the crumpled bill, suddenly putting the pieces together. "Wait, you own—" "I own the entire city block on 4th and Pike," Jade confirmed, never breaking eye contact with Richard, "which includes the Brass Bell Diner. It is a fully incorporated subsidiary of my holdings. I keep it running to honor my mother, and I work a shift there, anonymously, to ensure I never turn into someone like you." Richard's mouth opened, but no sound came out. The blood rushed out of his face so fast, he looked practically translucent. "This morning," Jade continued, her tone relentless, "you stood in a CH Investment subsidiary and publicly screamed at an employee. You used deeply offensive language, you caused property damage by shattering our glassware, and you physically assaulted a staff member by throwing this crumpled currency at her chest. The fact that the employee happened to be the CEO of the parent company is just the icing on the cake." "That wasn't assault," Richard practically shrieked, his voice jumping an octave in sheer panic. "It was a piece of paper. You cannot prove any of this." Jade raised her tablet again. "Shall we review the security footage? I have 4 high-definition cameras in that diner." Simon, the manager, forwarded the digital files to Harrison at 11 a.m. Checkmate. The realization hit Richard like a physical blow. He staggered backward, his legs hitting the edge of his chair. He was trapped. There was no severance. There was no golden parachute. His extravagant lifestyle, the Brioni suits, the Porsche Panamera, the penthouse apartment, was entirely sustained by his massive salary and the promise of impending bonuses. Without that $8 million, he wasn't just unemployed, he was financially ruined. "You set me up," Richard whispered, his eyes wide, darting frantically around the room. You trapped me." "I did no such thing," Jade replied calmly. "I handed you a glass of sparkling water. You chose to be a monster. I merely provided the consequences." Jade stood up, smoothing the front of her jacket. She looked down at him with an expression entirely devoid of pity. "Here are your options, Richard," Jade said, outlining the parameters of his defeat. "Option 1. You resign immediately. You walk out of this building with nothing but the clothes on your back. We will not press assault charges regarding the incident at the diner, but Harrison will ensure your termination for gross ethical misconduct becomes a very prominent part of your permanent corporate record. Good luck finding another executive job in this city." Richard swallowed hard, a bead of sweat tracing down his temple. "And option 2. "Option 2, Jade said, a faint, chilling smile returning to her lips. "You stay, but not as executive vice president. I am stripping you of your title, your corner office, your bonuses and your stock options. You will be reassigned to the facilities management division. Specifically, you will be coordinating the night shift custodial contracts for our downtown properties. You will report to a junior manager who is half your age, and your salary will be adjusted to the standard rate for that tier, approximately $65,000 a year." David gasped quietly. It was a demotion of catastrophic proportions, a public, humiliating stripping of rank that would make Richard the laughingstock of the financial district. "You want me to manage janitors?" Richard hissed, his face contorting with rage. "I am a Yale graduate. I am an acquisitions genius. I will not scrub floors for you." "You won't be scrubbing floors, Richard," Jade corrected gently. "You'll be managing the schedules of the people who do. People who wear uniforms. People who work hard, honest jobs. People who you currently believe are beneath your dignity. Perhaps 5 or 10 years in that role will teach you the one skill you desperately lack: basic human respect." The room held its breath. The silence stretched so tight it felt ready to snap. Suddenly, Richard's control shattered. The pristine veneer of the high-powered executive violently peeled away, revealing the raw, vicious bully underneath. "You absolute b—" Richard roared, lunging forward, his hands slamming onto the mahogany table. "You think you can humiliate me? I built this company's portfolio. I am the reason you wanted to buy it in the first place. You're nothing but a glorified waitress playing dress-up with daddy's money." Before David or Harrison could react, the boardroom doors swung open. 2 large, impeccably dressed security guards stepped into the room. "Thomas," Jade addressed the lead guard without flinching, her eyes fixed on Richard's furious face. Mr. Sterling was just leaving. He has chosen option 1. Please escort him to his office to collect his personal effects and then remove him from the premises. He is permanently barred from all Kensington Roth and CH Investments properties." "Yes, Miss Hayes," Thomas said, stepping up behind Richard and gripping his shoulder with a heavy, uncompromising hand. "Let's go, Mr. Sterling." Richard tried to wrench his shoulder away, but Thomas held firm. The fight drained out of Richard as quickly as it had erupted, replaced by the crushing, suffocating reality of his total ruin. He looked at Jade, his eyes wide with a mixture of hatred and profound regret. "You're making a mistake," Richard muttered weakly, his voice trembling. "I rarely do," Jade replied, turning her back on him. Thomas and the second guard marched Richard Sterling out of the boardroom. The heavy oak doors clicked shut behind them, sealing his fate, muting his footsteps as he began the long, humiliating walk down the hallway to a future he had never planned for. Jade took a slow, deep breath, feeling the toxic energy leave the room. She turned back to the table, picking up her tablet. "Now," Jade said, looking at David Kensington, who was still staring at the closed doors in stunned disbelief. Her voice warmed, shedding the icy armor she had worn for the execution. "David, let's talk about the Oak Ridge Community Center. I want to double the funding and fast-track the permits using legal, ethical channels. Shall we get to work?" David blinked, pulling his attention back to the new CEO. He looked at the empty chair where Richard had sat, and then up at Jade. A genuine, relieved smile broke across his face. "Yes, Ms. Hayes," David said eagerly, opening a fresh folder. "Let's get to work." The news of Richard Sterling's immediate and unceremonious termination rippled through the financial district of Seattle faster than a catastrophic stock market crash. In the insular, hyper-competitive world of commercial real estate, Kensington Roth had always been viewed as a ruthless predator, and Richard was its sharpest set of teeth. To hear that he had been entirely excised from the company, escorted out by security without so much as a cardboard box of personal effects, sent shockwaves through every boardroom from Bellevue to Pioneer Square. Inside Kensington Roth, the atmosphere underwent a whiplash-inducing transformation. On her second official day as CEO, Jade Hayes called a mandatory all-hands meeting in the main atrium. Over 400 employees gathered, expecting the usual corporate doublespeak about synergy, restructuring, and inevitable layoffs. Instead, Jade walked to the microphone wearing a simple, tailored navy blazer and dark jeans, completely devoid of the intimidating ivory armor she had worn to execute Richard. "Good morning," Jade began, her voice projecting clearly across the silent atrium. "My name is Jade Hayes. As of yesterday, CH Investments is the parent company of Kensington Roth. I know the rumors currently circulating. I know many of you are terrified for your jobs. Let me alleviate that anxiety immediately. There will be no mass layoffs." A collective, audible exhale swept through the crowd. "However," Jade continued, her tone sharpening just enough to command absolute attention, "there will be a massive shift in how this company operates. For the last 5 years, this firm has been driven by a culture of fear, intimidation, and ethical shortcuts. Revenue was prioritized over basic human decency. That ends today." She gestured toward David Kensington, who stood beside her, looking more confident than he ever had under his uncle's regime. "David Kensington will be stepping into the role of Executive Vice President," Jade announced. "Together, we are auditing every active project. If an acquisition relies on extortion, political blackmail, or the deliberate bankrupting of local businesses, we are terminating the deal. Furthermore, I am implementing a new mandatory program for all upper-level management, effective immediately. The Frontline Initiative." Murmurs of confusion broke out among the executives standing in the front rows. "Every employee with a title of director or above," Jade explained, her eyes sweeping over the high-priced suits, "will be required to spend 1 full working week, 40 hours, every fiscal year working in a minimum wage, front-line service position within our commercial properties. You will pour coffee. You will clean lobbies. You will run cash registers. If you are making decisions that impact the lives of working-class people, you will intimately understand the weight of the labor that builds your wealth. If you feel this is beneath you, Human Resources has been instructed to process your resignation with 0 friction." Nobody moved. Nobody offered a letter of resignation. The sheer, audacious reality of Jade's leadership had paralyzed the old guard and deeply inspired the younger staff. The reign of terror was over. While Jade was systematically rebuilding her new empire, Richard Sterling was rapidly discovering the horrifying limits of his own relevance. Sitting in his $4 million penthouse overlooking Elliott Bay, Richard frantically scrolled through his contacts on his iPhone. The initial shock of the boardroom ambush had metastasized into a desperate, clawing panic. His mortgage payment was due in 2 weeks. His Porsche was currently sitting in a high-end auto body shop, accumulating storage fees, and his financial portfolio was entirely tied up in illiquid assets and heavily leveraged margin accounts. He needed a massive signing bonus from a competitor, and he needed it yesterday. He dialed Bradley Hayes, no relation to Jade, a senior managing director at Cushman & Wakefield, and an old college fraternity brother. They had closed dozens of shady backroom deals over expensive scotch. "Brad," Richard said the moment the line connected, forcing a hearty, confident laugh. "It's Rich. Listen, I'm sure you've heard the noise by now. Kensington Roth got swallowed by some boutique firm, and the new leadership is completely unhinged. I decided to walk. I'm a free agent. I know your acquisitions team is looking for a heavyweight." There was a long, excruciating pause on the other end of the line. "Richard," Bradley finally said. His voice was cold, completely stripped of its usual frat boy camaraderie. "I heard." "Great. So let's grab lunch at the Metropolitan Grill and talk numbers." "I can't be seen having lunch with you, Rich," Bradley interrupted. The words felt like a physical blow to Richard's stomach. "What are you talking about?" Richard demanded, his fake cheerfulness instantly evaporating. "Harrison Cole," Bradley said quietly. "CH Investments' legal bulldog. He sent a blind copy email to the managing partners of every major firm on the West Coast, including Blackstone, JLL, and Yes. He didn't say much. He just legally certified that your departure was coded as gross ethical misconduct and internal sabotage. He attached a heavily redacted summary of the Oak Ridge Community Center extortion. Richard's blood ran cold. "That's slander. I'll sue them into the Stone Age." "It's not slander if they have the internal emails to back it up, Richard," Bradley sighed. "You're radioactive. Nobody is going to touch you. You're a liability. My compliance department explicitly flagged your name this morning. I'm sorry, man. You flew too close to the sun, and you burned the whole damn neighborhood down on your way down. Don't call this number again." Click! Richard stared at his phone as the screen faded to black. The silence in his massive, empty penthouse was deafening. The golden parachute he had always assumed would save him had been shredded, and the earth was rushing up to meet him at terminal velocity. 6 months later. The crisp, late-autumn air bit at the city of Seattle, swirling dead leaves across the cobblestone driveway of the Fairmont Olympic Hotel. The historic luxury hotel, a bastion of old-world elegance, was hosting the annual Pacific Northwest Philanthropy Gala. The street was lined with a convoy of black town cars, Mercedes sedans, and the occasional Bentley. Jade Hayes stepped out of the back of her modest, armored Audi A8. She was dressed impeccably in a midnight blue evening gown that whispered wealth rather than shouting it. She was attending the gala to publicly present a $10 million endowment to the city's underfunded public school district, a gesture that had thoroughly cemented her reputation as Seattle's most formidable, yet beloved, corporate titan. David Kensington walked beside her, adjusting his bow tie. "Nervous?" he asked, smiling. "Never," Jade replied smoothly, stepping onto the red carpet that led into the opulent lobby. "But I do dread the rubber chicken dinners. Remind me to stop at the Brass Bell for a real burger on the way home." "Noted," David laughed. "Simon said he's saving a slice of cherry pie for you." As they moved toward the entrance, an aggressively loud horn blasted from the driveway behind them. Jade paused and turned around. A cherry-red Ferrari was idling impatiently in the drop-off zone. The driver, a young tech bro in a flashy velvet tuxedo, was shouting out the window at a valet who was struggling to open the low-slung door fast enough. "Come on, buddy, move it! I don't pay you to stand there and admire the paint job," the driver yelled, waving a crumpled $10 bill in the air. The valet, an older man wearing a slightly oversized maroon hotel uniform coat, kept his head down. "I apologize, sir." "Right away, sir," the valet muttered, his voice muffled by the thick wool collar turned up against the wind. He hurried forward, took the keys, and handed the driver a claim ticket. The driver snatched it, dropped the crumpled $10 bill on the wet pavement, and swaggered into the hotel without a backward glance. The valet stood there for a moment in the freezing wind. Slowly he bent down, his knees popping audibly, and picked up the damp bill. Jade watched the interaction, a cold knot forming in her stomach. It was a scene she had witnessed 1,000 times in 1,000 different cities. The casual cruelty of the entitled. But as the valet stood up and turned his face toward the ambient light of the hotel's grand entrance, Jade froze. The man looked 10 years older than he had 6 months ago. The arrogant, razor-sharp jawline had softened into sagging exhaustion. The perfectly styled hair was thinning and unkempt, hidden beneath a cheap, peaked cap. The custom Brioni suits had been replaced by a stiff, synthetic uniform that offered no protection against the November chill. It was Richard Sterling. Jade stood completely still on the red carpet. David, noticing she had stopped, followed her gaze. "Is that?" David whispered, genuine shock coloring his voice. "Is that Richard?" "Yes," Jade said softly. Richard, shivering slightly, walked around to the driver's side of the Ferrari. Before he could pull the handle, he looked up and saw them. Time seemed to slow down. Across 20 feet of concrete and red carpet, the former master of the universe locked eyes with the waitress he had tried to destroy. Richard's face underwent a rapid, devastating sequence of emotions. First, a flash of defensive anger, then a profound, crushing humiliation. He looked down at his maroon valet jacket, the cheap brass name tag pinned to his chest, and the crumpled, wet $10 bill clutched in his freezing hand. He looked like a man who wanted the concrete to open up and swallow him whole. He expected her to laugh. He expected her to walk over, surrounded by the paparazzi flashes of the gala, and deliver the final, killing blow to his dignity. He expected her to treat him exactly the way he had treated her in that diner. Jade looked at him. She saw the exhaustion in his eyes. She saw the way his shoulders slumped beneath the weight of his own shattered ego. The universe had extracted its toll, and it had been merciless. Jade didn't smirk. She didn't gloat. She turned away from the entrance, stepped off the red carpet, and walked back toward the driveway. David stayed behind, watching in silent awe. Richard visibly flinched as she approached, instinctively stepping back against the door of the Ferrari. "Ms. Hayes," Richard rasped, his voice barely a whisper. He couldn't meet her eyes. He stared at the hem of her designer gown. I'm just doing my job. Please. Jade stopped 3 feet away from him. She reached into a small, silk evening clutch. It's a cold night for this kind of work, Richard, Jade said. Her voice was not cruel. It was completely, devastatingly neutral. It was the voice of a professional speaking to a service worker. Richard swallowed hard, a tear of pure shame pricking the corner of his eye. It pays the rent, he muttered. Jade pulled out a crisp, flawlessly smooth $100 bill. She didn't crumple it. She didn't throw it. She extended her hand and held it out to him, offering it with quiet, undeniable respect. Keep the driveway clear, Jade said softly, and make sure you stay warm. Richard stared at the bill. His hand shook as he reached out and took it. He looked up at her, his eyes shining with a complex mixture of agony, regret, and something that looked suspiciously like gratitude. Thank you, Mom, Richard whispered. Jade gave a brief, polite nod. She turned her back on him and walked toward the brilliant lights of the gala, leaving Richard Sterling standing in the cold, clutching the exact amount of money he had once thrown at her, finally understanding what it truly meant to earn it. Power is a fragile illusion, often masquerading as an expensive tailored suit or a heavy luxury watch. For Richard Sterling, power was a weapon used to bludgeon those he deemed beneath him, completely unaware that karma rarely waits an entire lifetime to collect its debts. He learned the hardest way possible that the people pouring the coffee, sweeping the floors and parking the cars are not invisible, and sometimes they are the ones holding the keys to the entire kingdom. Jade Hayes didn't just dismantle a bully, she dismantled the toxic ecosystem that created him. By forcing the executives of Kensington Roth to wear the aprons they once sneered at, she built an empire rooted in empathy rather than extortion. In the end, the stained diner apron proved to be far stronger than the $6,000 suit. A suit can only project status, but an apron proves you know how to work, and the universe, in all its wicked humor, always rewards the latter.